President Trump is campaigning in Pennsylvania Tuesday, rallying voters in a state he won 4 years ago. His visit comes one day after the Supreme Court denied a request from Pennsylvania Republicans. They wanted to halt an extension that allows mail-in ballots to be counted up to 3 days after the November 3rd election. The battleground has been no stranger to legal action this home stretch of the election. Earlier this month, a federal judge threw out a lawsuit from the Trump campaign challenging the use of drop boxes in the state. For more, let's bring in CBS News campaign reporters Nicole Sganga and Hudak. Nicole has been following the Trump campaign, and Zach has been reporting from the battleground of Pennsylvania. All right, home stretch, you two. It's great to see both of you. Zach, let me start with you. Tell us more about this decision from the Supreme Court. What does this mean for Pennsylvania voters and beyond?
Elaine, this is something that Pennsylvania Republicans have long been fighting against, and Pennsylvania Democrats have long been fighting for, pretty much all year long at various levels of the courts in this state. The Secretary of State, the top elections official in the state, is a Democrat. She initially opposed an extension like this, but midway through the summer, she got a letter from the Postal Service saying that they couldn't meet the deadlines set in Pennsylvania, that their service times just simply took longer. She sort of changed her tune on that. She then went to the court, said to the highest court in Pennsylvania, she said, can you actually grant this extension? The state Supreme Court did that. And what we saw here was Republicans appeal that to the U.S. Supreme Court. It was split 4-4, meaning that it goes with the lower court decision. This is essentially a win for Democrats from a votes perspective, because far more Democrats than Republicans in this state are voting by mail, and we know that in the primary, when a lot fewer people were voting, about 100,000 ballots came in after Election Day. So this is a state that Donald Trump won last time by 44,000 ballots, and far more than that now that skew Democratic will be counted. Could it affect the outcome? It could, it may not, but either way, Elaine, this pretty much guarantees that on election night, we will not know who won Pennsylvania because there will still be ballots coming in.
Well, Nicole, has the Trump campaign responded to the Supreme Court's decision?
Yes, the Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee that has been fighting tooth and nail in this decision have responded. I just spoke with a spokesperson for the RNC who said she is disappointed. They are disappointed. They call this an important issue that is raised in the motion. Now, there are two silver linings here for Republicans. That is, this case did rule in favor of Republicans on one thing. Ballots will be discarded if they're not returned in what's called an inner secrecy envelope. That is something Republicans fought for in the state of Pennsylvania. Other allies of the president and his campaign think this might underscore the importance of securing justices on the Supreme Court who back the president or who are at least conservative. So again, trying to rile up the base amid the confirmation hearings of Judge Amy Coney Barrett happening in Washington, D.C. Now, for his part, the president did address this yesterday on a call with campaign staff that CBS News was able to listen in on. He said he felt his lawyers across the country in these election lawsuits were doing phenomenal, securing so many victories, but he did claim that Democrats want to count votes, quote, 20 days after the election. Now, we don't know if it'll last this long, but as Zach pointed out, Pennsylvania doesn't start counting in those absentee ballots and processing them until polls close on Election Day. So we should anticipate to not hear back in that state, right on election night as we usually do.
Well, last week on Red and Blue, I asked Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro about this lawsuit and the other legal challenges over voting in his state. Here's what he had to say about them.
I think focusing on these lawsuits that are really just designed to distract and create noise in our process does a disservice to Pennsylvania voters. So whether it's Donald Trump or one of his enablers here in Pennsylvania, I would strongly urge voters, no matter who their choice is for whatever office, to simply make a plan to vote, ignore the noise, and be a part of our democracy.
Zach, have any of these lawsuits created problems with early voting or confused voters in Pennsylvania? It's hard to keep up with everything.
Elaine, it's hard to attribute it to one thing, but there is certainly confusion. We found out just earlier this week that about 370,000 applications for mail ballots were rejected. That sounds alarming, right? But in reality, the majority of those, about 90%, were people who had actually checked a box on their application in the primary and meant they were automatically registered for a mail-in ballot in the general. So this is a major change for voting in Pennsylvania. First time anyone can vote by mail. There's a major influx of it, and there's a lot of information out there and a lot of changing roles. So it's hard to chalk it up to this one lawsuit has confused people, et cetera. But I think what has confused people is that the roles are changing, the laws are changing, and it's a lot to keep track of, and you can see it playing out right there.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, President Trump is trying to rally voters again in the swing state Tuesday night in Erie, Pennsylvania. On Monday in Arizona, he again targeted suburban women. Let's listen to some of that.
I kept hearing that women from the suburbs won't like Trump. I said, why? Because I'm stopping crime? You're going to have suburbs be safe. Suburbs, you're having safe suburbs. And you're not going to have low-income housing projects built next to your house.
So, Nicole, does the Trump campaign believe that that strategy, that approach, will appeal to suburban women?
Yeah, well, the Trump campaign has been looking at some of these poll numbers, and, they're not particularly optimistic when it comes to women, particularly white women, in a state where 6 out of 10 voters live in the suburbs. Now, it's important to note here that in 2016, President Trump won among white women against then Secretary Hillary Clinton in Pennsylvania by 50% to Clinton's 47%. That's according to exit polls. Now we see some of this polling. Biden is ahead by as much as 23 points with white women. That's according to a Quinnipiac survey out earlier this month. A Washington Post ABC News poll out in late September showed Biden up 13% among white women. Now, these margins matter, particularly in a state that the president won in 2016, as Zach pointed out, by only 44,000 votes. It's an electoral votes powerhouse, Pennsylvania. And the president and his campaign have been employing this sort of law and order messaging, pouring millions into ads that talk about, how streets could be overtaken by violent protesters. They're simply not seeing the outcomes that they wanted, particularly among this key demographic. In fact, the last time the president campaigned in Pennsylvania, he was in Johnstown, and he said, quote, "Suburban women, will you please like me?"
Right. I remember seeing that bite of the president on the campaign trail. All right. Well, Nicole Sganga and Zach Hudak, we are almost there. Thank you both so much. Really great to have you both.